Hey folks, Matt Easton here. This is for Patreon viewers, and thanks again for your support. This is the first Patreon video of this month. Sorry it's coming quite late in the month. We're almost in the middle of the month now, aren't we? But fundamentally I've just been super busy this month. Kind of job stuff, busy with work, busy with job applications because I'm trying to change my work, my day job that is. I'm actually, between you and me, I'm also trying to reduce my day job working time so I can do even more time doing the videos and antique sales mostly, because that's what I want to do with my life. I've also been away for a few days down in the southwest, in the West Country, down in Devon for a wedding, and yeah, I've been having a nice time, but it's been quite tiring. But anyway, so I'm getting back into the regular swing of things now, and I thought first up video for this month, I'll still try and squeeze 3 in, is looking at a new acquisition of mine. I've actually got 2 of them, but I'll show you this one first. So what is it? Well, some of you will know exactly what it is, and some of you will be like, what the hell is that? Because they're pretty weird looking things, aren't they? So what is it, first of all? It's from Borneo, and it's a headhunter's sword. And what do I mean by a headhunter? Well, quite simply, in Borneo, the Dyaks, the Sea Dyaks principally, but the Dyak people of Borneo, and that also, it's in several areas actually, Borneo, in several countries as it were. Part of it's in Sarawak, for example, and that's where some of my personal interest comes in, because I own a few British officers' swords from Sarawak, and I got quite interested in the kingdom of Sarawak under the so-called White Rajas, the Brooke family. Very interesting. So I'm going to digress right there actually, because it's quite interesting and it's worth mentioning. The Brooke, James Brooke, the founder of that kind of dynasty, as it were. James Brooke was a Royal Navy officer, and he went out to fight pirates in the early to mid 19th century, kind of 1840s, I think, and essentially he did lots of useful stuff against piracy around what's now Sarawak, around Borneo area, and as a result the Sultan of Brunei, as a thank you, gave him Sarawak and a title and said, "You're now the Raja of Sarawak." And he went, "Wow, holy shit, okay, I'm a Raja of an entire kingdom now." And there's lots of controversy actually about Sarawak, because obviously on the surface of it, it seems like, oh, you know, colonialization, blah blah blah, and you know, how were the local people involved in this type of process suddenly getting a new ruler and all that kind of stuff. I've read a few different books from different political perspectives. It seems, by and large, if you talk to people from Sarawak today, that the Brooke family and essentially the Anglicisation of Sarawak seems to still be generally regarded as having been a good thing. So one of the 2 things that they seem to have achieved, or 3 things, let's say, that they seem to have achieved is, number 1, they stamped out headhunting. And that's where this type of sword comes in. Now, what was headhunting? Well, first of all, let's just take it out of the scabbard for a minute. So it's a sort of parang, okay? It's a sort of chopper, a bit like a machete. Quite a thick blade, very sharp edge, often laminated or not quite pattern welded. I don't think they were making pattern welded blades there, maybe they were, but they're certainly layered. You can see the sort of striations of the layers of the blade. And I'll put that back in, I'll talk a bit more about the sword in a minute. And headhunting was literally the cultural tradition of chopping the heads off rivals from other tribes and keeping their heads and shrinking them. So these shrunken heads you may have seen in things like Tintin or something, or maybe in museums. There's some in the Pitt Rivers Museum in Oxford. The shrunken heads, that's what they were chopped off with these things. They principally fought with spears, blowpipes, bows, things like this, but these swords were used in close combat with shields, incidentally, although not always, but usually with shields, and chop the head off, and you keep the head and shrink the head, and through doing that you would try and kind of take their power, take their magic. So the Brookes stamped out headhunting. Secondly, they stamped out piracy. That's the politically dubious bit. for something. I think I'll talk about that in a future video, but just to very briefly mention it, essentially there's some people who argue that there wasn't any piracy and that this was just inter-tribe raiding, but in the British Empire there was a bounty on any piracy, and if you caught or killed pirates you could claim money from the crown, from the government. And so there's some indication that perhaps what James Brooke was doing was basically killing local tribal warriors and going, look, I killed some pirates, and getting money for it, and maybe they weren't actually pirates at all. But anyway, that's another topic, and it's a very deep topic and not something I understand everything about. And the third thing they did is they brought kind of the advantages of Western civilization, for example, medicine and schools, to Sarawak. So they basically created, they massively reduced the number of people dying from things like cholera, for example. So anyone who goes, oh, colonialism's a terrible, terrible thing, generally speaking, as a concept, it's a bad thing, but it has sometimes good side effects. And one of those things is medicine, for example. And, a perfect example there, in Sarawak, the number of children dying from disease massively reduced under the Brookes. Anyway, so back to the headhunter's swords. So these were the weapons of headhunters, and they're really bizarre things. The blades themselves are not very bizarre. It's actually quite like a sax, isn't it? It's quite like a lang sax from the Anglo-Saxon or Viking era. But the handles are really weird. They're made of, this one's made of bone. Sometimes they're made of wood or horn or other things. I suspect originally, I don't actually know what bit of bone that is. Bit of a hip or something? No, I don't know. I don't know anyway, but, and I don't know what animal it is either, but it's extremely, I'll try and get out of the way so the camera focuses on, hold on, there we go. So you can see how ornate that carving is. It's quite insane. I've incidentally worked out how to make my camera focus on specific things. I just have to touch the touchscreen. It's as simple as that. And equally, the scabbard, if I do that, you can see how ornate that scabbard is. It's quite crazy. Really, really super ornate. And I also have to say, quite fragile. It's very clear to me that these aren't the sort of weapons that were made with equipping soldiers in mind. It's incredibly ritualistic and incredibly ornate. And bits of the scabbard are falling apart. It's not robust. It's made of mostly organic materials, obviously, except for the blade, but everything else is organic on it and quite fragile. But way more innate than it needs to be. It's very clear that this is essentially, although they were carried by warriors, in a way it's a ceremonial weapon, because probably the majority of their fighting was done with spears and bows and blowpipes. These weapons, I suspect, were kept on their side almost like a badge of office and showing off, and probably, the richer you were, the more fancy you had. And then they were pulled out to chop the person's head off ritualistically. So they're basically almost like, I would argue, they're almost like an execution weapon. And I do have another, just one thing to mention before I drop this one and put the other one up. That hair, I have read, but I don't know whether it's true, that's human hair. And there's other hair as well. There's hair on the scabbard and stuff, and I believe that's hair taken from enemies. And I kind of hope it's not. I've got to say, it doesn't look like, to me, it doesn't look like human hair. Obviously, I'm not the expert on human hair, but to me, it looks like pig hair, maybe wild boar, something like that. I know they have little wild boars there, because I've read accounts of British officers hunting boars there. To me, it looks like it's off an animal, not a human. And I kind of hope that that's the case. Right, let's pick up the other one. Not that I'm squeamish, but yeah, human hair. And here's the other one. This one's interesting. It's got it's still got the auction thingy on it. I'll hide that. I've got one of these in auction, obviously. And it's got so I'll just tap the screen to make it focus on there we go. It's got another very ornate pommel, I suppose. Kind of a pommel, isn't it? With hair coming out of lots of different orifices, so to speak. And this one actually has brass wire wrapped kind of handle section, and then some type of skin. This one's got an interesting blade. It's got the same kind of blade shaped like a sax, as the other one, but I don't know whether you'll be able to see. Oh yeah, I think you can actually. Right, let's try and do that. Can you see the blade actually has incised filed decoration in it? This is quite grubby and dirty. It's actually covered in some kind of grease. Literally, these arrived yesterday. The courier brought them to me yesterday, so I haven't had a chance to clean them or do anything to them yet. They need a bit of a clean. I'm probably going to be selling both of these on my website, Eastern Antique Arms. This one's got a bit of a... They've both got slightly damaged scabbards. In fact, the scabbards are very fragile, but this one's even more damaged. But anyway, hopefully it'll be possible to clean those up and make them a little bit more presentable. But anyway, very nice things. And really, if you search for Borneo headhunters and the Dyaks, that's D-Y-A-K, very interesting warrior people, and their sort of encounters with the British and other people of the area. They were very bellicose, very warlike. And it's a very interesting little facet of history that not many people know about. And if you like reading about, you know, fighting and combat accounts and stuff like that, it's quite interesting. I'm actually in the process of researching that a little bit more. I own two British officers' swords made by Wilkinson for Sarawak officers. So they were people who had served in British military and basically transferred to the Sarawak military under James Brooke and his son, or nephew as it was actually, served as officers in Sarawak. And it's a particular design of sword. They're exceptionally rare. I only know of 4 or 5 existing in the world, and I own 2 of them, so I was very lucky. I knew what they were and I recognised them and I bought them and I kept them. And the Museum of Sarawak tried to buy one off me, which one day maybe I'll sell one to them, because in a way it feels right that maybe one should go back to Sarawak. And also, if you read about James Brooke, that's B-R-O-O-K-E, he's exceptionally interesting individual. Good and bad about him. Won't describe him as any kind of hero, but certainly his life story is very fascinating. And there are a few books you can find on Amazon written about Sarawak and James Brooke and the Brooke family. Anyway, I hope that was interesting, and I'll see you for the next Patreon video. Cheers, folks.